I had exactly $487,216.34 scheduled to transfer out of my late mother's trust the morning my husband came home after 11 months of finding himself, kissed the tops of our daughters' heads like he had merely missed a long weekend, and set a cream-colored envelope on my kitchen counter with the kind of confidence men borrow from lies they have repeated too often. I was still carrying the numb, tight ache of an emergency C-section in bad weather, still waking up every night at the smallest sound from two babies who had entered the world 6 weeks early. And the envelope in front of me contained a signature page for a sale I had never approved, a notarized consent form I had never seen, and a handwritten note in his neat, slanted print that said, "If you miss this, you lose everything." My hand shook so hard I nearly spilled cold coffee over the page. Then I saw the property address. My mother's building. The one she left in trust for me and any children I had. The one Ethan had once called our backup plan, with a softness that now felt like reconnaissance. He smiled and told me we could talk after dinner. I put the phone face down. Then I looked at the envelope again and understood that he had not come back because he loved us. He had come back because something valuable still had my name on it. Let me take you back. My name is Nora Callahan. I was 38 years old when Ethan left me with newborn twins and a house full of silence that somehow felt louder than crying. We lived in Savannah, Georgia then, in a pale brick house on a quiet street lined with old oaks and sidewalks warped by roots. I handled books and compliance, work for a regional freight company before the girls were born. Ethan ran a boutique fitness studio that he spoke about the way people describe religions, with certainty, performance, and a little too much need to be admired. On paper, we made sense. He was charismatic, social, impossible to miss in a room. I was steady, organized, the person who noticed deadlines before they became disasters. My flaw, if I am being honest, was that I mistook endurance for wisdom. I thought if I stayed calm enough, prepared enough, useful enough, I could prevent ugly things from becoming real. The twins, June and Willa, arrived by emergency C-section after a long, ugly night of rising blood pressure, monitors, clipped instructions, and one nurse with kind eyes who squeezed my shoulder before they wheeled me into surgery. I remember the smell of antiseptic, the cold brightness of the operating room, and Ethan standing near my head looking pale and inconvenienced in equal measure. Not frightened for me. Not overwhelmed by the idea of daughters coming early and tiny and needing help. Just disturbed by how little control he had over the scene. Both girls went briefly to the NICU. Nothing catastrophic, thank God, but enough to turn our lives into a cycle of alarms, feeding logs, weight checks, and that thin constant fear that comes with fragile newborns. For the first 2 weeks, Ethan performed concern well enough to fool anyone passing through. He carried a car seat if someone was watching. He posted one carefully framed black and white photo of our daughter's feet with a caption about gratitude and perspective. He brought coffee to nurses and used words like warrior when speaking about me to other people. In private, he winced at crying. He slept with one pillow over his head and then complained about headaches. He said things like, "I don't know how anyone lives like this," as if parenthood had been sprung on him by an ambush instead of biology and a 9-month calendar. The night he left was warm for October, humid in that way coastal Georgia manages, even when the season says it should be over. It was 2:14 in the morning. June had reflux and Willa hated being set down. I was in the living room in an oversized gray t-shirt with one baby against my shoulder and the other in a bouncer bouncing herself mad with hunger and outrage while a bottle warmed in a mug of hot water on the coffee table. Ethan came down the stairs carrying a duffel bag. At first I thought he was going to the guest room. We had already started taking shifts that never really worked because he believed inconvenience counted as contribution. But he kept walking. Shoes on. Keys in hand. I remember looking up and saying, "What are you doing?" in a voice that sounded flatter than I felt because exhaustion sands a motion down to bearwood. He didn't stop. "I can't do this tonight." I adjusted June higher on my shoulder. "Nobody can do this tonight. That's why we're doing it." He let out one sharp laugh, not amused, just irritated. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Make everything sound simple when it isn't." Willa started crying harder. The bottle was ready. My incision felt hot and mean under the waistband of my soft pants. "Ethan," I said, "please don't start something right now." He shifted the duffel bag higher. "I need space." I actually stared at him for a second because the sentence was so ridiculous next to two newborns and a sink full of bottles that my mind rejected it on impact. "You need space." "Yes." I looked at the bag, then at him. "You are not leaving." He met my eyes and I saw it then, that chilling little stillness people get when a decision has already been made in private and the conversation in front of you is just an inconvenience before exit. "I'm leaving for a while." For a while, I repeated. "I need to think. I need to breathe. This house is chaos." The baby on my shoulder hiccuped. The other one screamed in the bouncer. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and stopped. "These are your daughters." He rubbed his forehead like I was being unfair. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Turn this into some moral performance." I can still feel how quiet I went. Moral performance. I didn't say I was never coming back. I said I need time. I picked up the bottle and fed Willa one-handed while he stood there holding the duffel bag like a college boy taking a weekend trip. "How much time?" "I don't know." He opened the front door. Warm, dark air moved into the room. "Call me when things settle down." That was the line. Not goodbye. Not take care of yourself. Not kiss the girls for me. Call me when things settle down, as if infant life operated like weather fronts and my only failure had been bad scheduling. Then he left. I stood there with the bottle in one hand and June asleep against my chest and watched the shape of his car lights vanish through the front window. I did not scream. I did not run after him. I sat down very slowly because my body had its own limits, and then I fed one baby, then the other, and then I cried with the kind of silence that feels less like sadness than like a structural failure no one else can hear. The next morning, I found out the leaving had not been impulsive. Ethan had moved money over the prior week in increments small enough to avoid a bank alert. He drained most of our joint checking and all of our emergency savings except for $612.84, which is a number I remember because I stared at it so long it stopped looking real. He had also used a line of credit attached to his business. At the time, I did not understand why that mattered. Later, I would understand that Ethan never did anything without placing the risk where someone else would absorb the impact. My mother had died 3 years before that night. Ovarian cancer. Fast, efficient, merciless. She left me one thing of real value beyond what grief calls value, a brick mixed-use building on Broughton Street that held a florist on the first floor and 2 apartments above it. It was in an irrevocable trust she had built with a probate lawyer because she had seen enough weak men orbiting money to know romance was not a security structure. The trust paid modest distributions and held the property unless certain conditions were met. Ethan had smiled when the lawyer first explained it and said, "Your mother was serious." He said it like admiration. I hear it differently now. For the first week after he left, I did not think about the trust. I thought about formula, pediatric follow-ups, utility bills, gauze pads, my incision, and whether I could safely drive to the pharmacy on 2 hours of broken sleep. My world got very small. I became a creature of lists. Feedings. Diapers, temperatures, weight checks, medication, call insurance, wash bottles, try to eat, keep the girls alive. There is a type of clarity that arrives when no one is coming to save you. It is not inspiring while you are inside it. It is merely practical. My neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, knocked on the 3rd morning with chicken soup, 2 loaves of banana bread, and the expression of a woman who had seen enough human behavior to sort disaster from inconvenience on sight. She was in her late 60s, always immaculate, silver hair in a blunt chin-length bob, linen shirts even in heat, and a gold watch she wound by hand because she distrusted anything that needed charging. Ethan used to call her intimidating. She took one look at me, one look at the girls, and said, "He left." It was not a question. I nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door with one deliberate motion. "Sit down before you fall down." "I'm okay." "No," she said calmly, "you're functioning." "That is not the same thing." I sat. She took Willa from my arms with the confidence of someone who had done difficult things in better clothes than mine and asked where my checkbook was. That was our beginning. Over the next month, she became the fixed point in my week. She came by every afternoon for an hour. Sometimes she held a baby while I showered. Sometimes she watched both girls so I could sleep sitting upright on the sofa like a person in transit. Sometimes she looked through bills and arranged them into stacks that made the future appear less feral. My oldest scar with Ethan had nothing to do with money and everything to do with ranking. He was his parents' only son, and in that family, he had been polished into importance so early it hardened in him. At our first Christmas after marriage, his mother gave his sister a knitted scarf and me scented hand cream, then spent 30 minutes toasting Ethan's vision for a second studio he had not funded, planned, or secured. My promotion that same month did not make it to dessert conversation. He squeezed my knee under the table and whispered, "Don't take it personally. They just get excited about potential." I remember smiling because there were people watching. Later in the car I said, "Potential for what?" He answered, "For scale." I turned my face to the passenger window and watched holiday lights blur past because I had just learned that work I had done would always weigh less in that ecosystem than the fantasy of something he might one day do if properly admired. The second scar was more private. When my mother got sick, I was at the hospital nearly every evening for months. Ethan came sometimes, always with visible generosity, flowers for nurses, coffees for staff, hand on my back when anyone could see it. One night, after a long infusion delay, we drove home in silence. I was tired enough to feel hollow. He said, "You've been impossible lately." I thought I misheard him. "What?" "You act like no one else is living through this." I turned to him. "My mother is dying." He shrugged one shoulder. "And I'm your husband. But lately I get the scraps." That was the first time I recognized the calm cruelty in him. Not rage. Not chaos. Something more polished. His ability to place himself at the center of another person's emergency and then call the distortion love. I should have seen more after that. I saw enough to worry. Not enough to leave. When the girls were 6 weeks old, I finally called my mother's lawyer, Nathan Bowell, because the trust had a scheduled annual review and I needed to ask whether distributions could be adjusted for childcare or medical expenses. I sat at my kitchen table with June asleep across my lap and Willa in a bassinet beside me making tiny goat sounds in her sleep while Nathan explained, in that patient southern voice old lawyers cultivate, that yes, emergency health and child welfare expenses could be considered by the independent trustee. Then he paused and asked, "And how is Ethan handling fatherhood?" I did not answer fast enough. "Nora," he said, "is there a problem?" My pride cost me 2 weeks. I wish I could tell you I was immediately honest. I was not. I said something soft and vague about strain, adjustment, everybody being tired. Then he said, "Your mother paid me very well to write around optimistic interpretations. I need a straighter answer." So I gave him one. There was silence on the line. Not shocked silence. Legal silence. Processing silence. He asked, "Has he accessed any trust documents?" "No. Has he ever handled your trust portal credentials?" "I don't think so." "Please don't think." "Please no." I looked at the pantry door where we kept a magnetic clipboard with passwords in a code only I understood, except suddenly I was not entirely certain what Ethan had or had not seen over the years. "I'm not sure." "All right," Nathan said, and his voice sharpened in a way that made me sit up straighter. "I'm going to ask you a hard question. Is there any chance he left because he believes money is about to move?" I looked down at June's small sleeping face, at the pink mouth slightly open, at my own reflection in the black microwave door across the kitchen. My mother's building won't sell for years. That is not what I asked. The truth arrived all at once and sat in my chest like something metal. Ethan had known a distribution review was coming. He had asked twice in the prior month whether the building could ever be leveraged for growth. He had made a joke once about old money being wasted on flower shops and sentiment. I had dismissed it because new mothers dismiss many things that do not cry. "I don't know," I said. "All right," he repeated. "Do not sign anything. Do not discuss the trust with him if he contacts you. I want you in my office next Tuesday. Bring any mail you don't understand." That Tuesday, I left the girls with Eleanor Vance for 90 minutes and drove downtown with a tote bag full of paperwork and the particular guilt new mothers carry whenever they leave babies anywhere, even in excellent hands for good reasons. Nathan Bell's office occupied the second floor of an old building with narrow stairs and creaking wood floors. He had practiced probate and trust law in Savannah for 30 years and looked as if he had been assembled from khaki, reading glasses, and mild disappointment. He listened. He read bank statements. He asked for exact dates. Then he opened my trust binder and walked me through clauses I had skimmed when my mother died because grief makes legal language look like weather. There was a fraud carve-out tied to coercion, forgery, concealment, and incapacity. There was a child protection trigger that allowed the trustee to freeze distributions or replace beneficiaries' access structure if a spouse or third party attempted to impair assets meant for minor children. There was even a reimbursement clause. If someone caused legal expense through fraudulent interference, the trust could seek fees. Nathan tapped one page with a fountain pen. Your mother was careful. I smiled without humor. She liked paperwork more than people. No, he said gently. She liked protection more than charm. Then he looked at me over his glasses. This isn't revenge. This is justice. At the time, I did not feel powerful hearing it. I felt embarrassed. Like I had failed some basic adult test by marrying a man the clause seemed to anticipate. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from a title company with a printed label and no return note. I almost tossed it into the pile of postpartum insurance nonsense because that is what exhaustion does. It flattens urgency into paper. But Eleanor happened to be standing at my sink sterilizing bottles, and when she saw the company logo, she said, "Open that." Inside was a request for owner confirmation related to a pending sale inquiry on the Broughton Street property. Sale inquiry. My mother's building. I sat down so fast the chair legs scraped tile. There must be some mistake, I said. Eleanor took the letter, read it once, then again. She did not look surprised. Maybe, she said. Maybe not. I called Nathan from the kitchen floor. He had me photograph the letter and send it immediately. By the end of the afternoon, he called back and told me there had been a preliminary contact initiated through an LLC called Tidal Meridian Holdings. The inquiry referenced an anticipated beneficiary consent and a proposed fast-close sale once a distribution event matured. Ethan did not own the LLC on paper. Someone named Graham Pike did, a man I had once met at a studio launch party who wore expensive loafers without socks and spoke about debt the way gamblers speak about luck. I remember the room tilting, then correcting itself. He can't sell it, I said. No, Nathan replied. Not lawfully. My hand was sweating against the phone. Then why is there an inquiry? Because men like this often mistake motion for ownership. That should have relieved me. It did not. Wrongful action still has administrative weight. Even lies generate paperwork. Nathan told me to remain calm while he sent notice of disputed authority and initiated a freeze on any trust-related transfer activity. Then he said the sentence that split my life into before and after. There may already be forged consent documents in circulation. I think something in me had still been hoping for recklessness, not design. Not forged signatures. Not LLC shells. Not the full architecture of theft. The second folder changed everything. That is not a dramatic line. It is simply the truth. Nathan asked me to come in the next morning because a courier packet had arrived from the title company's compliance desk, and when I sat in his office with milk stains on my shirt and a legal pad in front of me, he opened a second gray folder and slid 3 documents across the desk. A beneficiary acknowledgement, a consent to market, and a limited authorization form. All carried my name in crisp blue digital script. All had been notarized electronically on a night I was admitted to the hospital with postpartum complications and elevated blood pressure. I was literally attached to monitors while my supposed signature authorized movement on inherited property. My vision went strange around the edges. That's not my signature. I know. How do you know? Nathan slid another page forward. Audit metadata. The documents were created from a laptop browser session linked to my old email account, but the IP address originated from our home network at 11:42 p.m. The hospital records showed I was at St. Joseph's under observation then. Ethan had been at home because he said he needed to shower and take care of some things. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. He used my laptop. Most likely. My mouth went dry. Can they prove that? Potentially. I looked up. Potentially isn't enough. It may be, he said, if the puzzle pieces are arranged correctly. This is where Eleanor Vance became something other than a generous neighbor. When I got home that afternoon, she was in my dining room sorting baby clothes by size into neat piles. I told her everything because by then she knew enough to hear the rest. She listened without interrupting, then asked, "Was there a home camera in the nursery?" "Yes. We used it as a baby monitor backup. Cloud storage." "I think so." She nodded once. "Pull the logs." I stared at her. The what? The access logs. Device history. Upload times. Anything that shows who was moving around the house the night he claims you signed documents elsewhere. I said, "How do you know about access logs?" She folded a tiny yellow sleeper with military precision. Because before I retired, I spent 28 years at the county recorder's office dealing with forged deeds, fake acknowledgments, and men who think women don't understand paper. I actually laughed then, one startled sound in the middle of a bad week. "You worked in title fraud?" "Enough adjacent to it," she said. "Long enough to learn that vanity leaves fingerprints." That was the ally identity twist in my life, though I would not have called it that then. The intimidating widow next door was not simply organized. She understood chain of title, recording practices, document timestamps, and the human ego. Within an hour, she had me logged into the nursery camera account. The access history showed motion-triggered clips from the night Ethan said he was asleep on the sofa. At 11:39 p.m., the hallway camera captured him carrying my laptop and the trust binder into the dining room. At 11:46 p.m., he was on his phone pacing. At 11:51 p.m., Graham Pike entered through the back door. They stayed in the dining room 40 minutes with the blinds drawn. No audio, no dramatic confession. Just movement, timing, presence. Enough to change a question into a case. Nathan's office coordinated with a forensic document examiner and the title company's internal compliance counsel. I learned terms I had never expected to use in a life containing diapers and formula: affidavit, beneficial interest, digital certificate, notarized acknowledgement, cloud retention, escrow dispute, injunctive relief. Every term mattered because every term became a bridge from instinct to proof. I was not a wife with concerns. I was a beneficiary contesting unauthorized action on a protected trust asset using hospital records, metadata, device logs, and witness timing. Language turned pain into structure. Ethan, meanwhile, remained gone. For 3 months there was almost no direct contact. A few texts. Need time. Hope girl's okay. Please don't make this uglier than it is. That last one arrived while I was measuring infant medication after June spiked a fever. I looked at the message, then at the syringe in my hand, and understood something essential. People who create ugliness often become very delicate when confronted with the administrative record of what they did. Money stayed tight. The trustee approved emergency distributions for childcare support, medical bills, and temporary in-home help. I went back to part-time remote bookkeeping sooner than I wanted because the practical world does not pause simply because your marriage has become evidence. I pumped milk during spreadsheets. I balanced invoices at 1 a.m. with one baby asleep on my chest and the other in a bassinet nudging herself awake. Some nights I hated Ethan with a clarity that felt chemical. Most nights I was too tired to hate anybody properly. My emotional setback was not some cinematic breakdown. It was smaller and more humiliating. In month 4, after a pediatric appointment, sleep deprivation and old longing ambushed me in a parking lot. Ethan called out of nowhere. His voice was softer than I remembered. He asked about the girls. He said he had been in Arizona, then Costa Rica, then mostly offline. He said he knew he had handled things badly. He said, "I miss you." The sentence struck somewhere old in me, in the version of marriage that lived before evidence. I sat in the car and listened longer than I should have. He cried a little. Real tears or good technique, I still cannot say. He told me he wanted to come home and rebuild from truth. I said yes to meeting him. Nathan was furious when I told him. Not theatrical, just cold. You are free to meet your husband, he said, but understand this. Men do not attempt to move trust property through an LLC because they are confused. They do it because they think they can. I know that. Do you? I hated him for 10 minutes because he was right in the precise tone lawyers reserve for clients about to make their own lives worse. Then I hated myself because part of me had still wanted Ethan to be redeemable in a way the file did not support. We met in a hotel lounge downtown because I refused to bring him into the house. He looked good in the way morally unserious men often do after time away from consequences. Tanned, leaner, expensive watch, linen shirt, practiced sorrow. He held my gaze a second too long before saying, "You look tired." I almost smiled. "Thank you." He winced. "That's not what I meant." We talked for 40 minutes. Or rather, he performed repair for 40 minutes while avoiding specifics. He said he had panicked. He said fatherhood hit him harder than expected. He said the pressure of the studio debt made him spiral. When I asked about the forged documents, he went still. Then he did something that cured me of the remaining illusion. He leaned forward and lowered his voice and said, "Nathan Bell is turning this into something it isn't." I looked at him. Is it what? A family issue. A forged signature is not a family issue. His jaw tightened. I never intended to hurt you. That is not the same as not intending to use me. He sat back. The softness left his face so quickly it felt like a curtain dropping. You always did this, he said. You take one mistake and turn it into identity. One mistake. Hospital-time digital forgery tied to my dead mother's property while his newborn daughters were in diapers. One mistake. I stood up. We're done here. He caught my wrist lightly, not violent, just presumptuous. Nora, please. Don't blow up our lives over paperwork. That sentence became a clean blade in my mind. Not because it hurt, because it clarified. Men who love you do not call your legal protection paperwork. Men who fear exposure do. By month 6, Ethan's studio had quietly folded. Graham Pike's LLC had mounting debt and an unpaid tax issue. We learned, through discovery efforts tied to the attempted property transfer, that Ethan had represented to at least 2 investors that he expected near-term access to family real estate leverage through his wife's trust. My mother's building had become part of pitch material. Not openly. Not in glossy decks. Inside emails, text assurances, back-channel confidence. I saw one message where he called the building effectively controlled once domestic noise settles. I had to put the printed page down after reading that because my hands were shaking hard enough to blur the words. Domestic noise. That was me and the girls. Our existence rendered as temporary interference before capital deployment. Nathan sought an emergency restraining order against any representation of authority over the trust assets, plus notice to all associated parties of disputed claim and suspected fraud. The court granted interim restrictions faster than Ethan expected because hospital records and digital metadata are not emotional. They sit there and exist. He still did not come home. Then, in month 10, he began orbiting again. There were flowers first. White roses. I threw them out because they smelled like strategy. Then there were texts. Can we be adults? This has gone too far. I want to see my daughters. That last one mattered. Whatever he had been as a husband, he was still their father-in-law, and Nathan was careful to separate moral disgust from procedural discipline. A temporary visitation plan was drafted pending psychological and parenting evaluations because Ethan had abandoned the household during neonatal care. He objected loudly through counsel and then agreed when the alternative looked worse. The first supervised visit took place in a family services office with beige walls and toys that had been sanitized into sadness. I did not sit in the room. I waited outside. When he emerged after an hour, his face was pale and strange. They don't know me, he said. I looked at him. They're infants. He swallowed. For 1 second, I thought I saw actual remorse. Then he added, "You've made me a stranger." That was Ethan's gift. Even in consequences, he looked for a route back to centrality. A month later, he returned fully. Not spiritually. Not morally. Physically. He rented a condo on the south side and announced through text that he was back in Savannah for good and wanted to stabilize things. By then, the girls were toddling, unsteady and beautiful and loud in the healthiest possible way. I had lost the soft, swollen look of early postpartum. I was back at work half-time in office and half remote. I slept in segments still, but they were human segments. I no longer cried every day. That felt like wealth. Then came the envelope. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in a navy sport coat carrying that cream-colored envelope like a man delivering improved weather. June and Willa were in high chairs smearing banana into modern art across their trays. I let him in because the visitation schedule allowed for pickup and because by then all serious conversations happened with my phone recording in my pocket or with counsel copied later. Safety can become a habit. I recommend it. He bent to kiss the girl's hair. They tolerated him with the mild suspicion toddlers reserve for guests who act too familiar. Then he put the envelope on the counter and said, "This could solve everything." I did not touch it immediately. "What is it?" "A sale package. Preliminary only. The market is perfect right now." Bell is dragging his feet because that's how old trust lawyers justify their rates. The girls banged spoons. Outside, a city truck beeped in reverse somewhere down the block. I opened the envelope and found a purchase offer, consent pages, and an expected distribution schedule tied to my mother's building. There was also a note. "If you miss this, you lose everything." I looked up at him. Why would I lose everything? "Because the property is overexposed and underperforming," he said smoothly. "And because if we don't act now, the debt situation around Graham's vehicle could contaminate the buyer appetite." The sentence was so revealing it almost felt generous. Graham's vehicle. He realized then that he had said too much. "You know what I mean." "Yes," I said. "I do." He took a breath, shifted tone, and tried concern. "Nora, listen to me. I know how this looks. But the fastest way out is alignment. We sell, retire the noise, reset, and move forward for the girls." There it was again. The girls as scenery. Their future as leverage. I set the pages down carefully. "You're asking me to sign into a structure tied to your fraudulent representations." His face hardened. "You sound insane when you talk like that." "Do I? We are married. Legally. Temporarily." He smiled then, but without warmth. "You're still angry. I get it. But anger is not strategy." I thought of hospital records, camera logs, investor emails, title notices. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." He leaned in. "There's a donor dinner Friday at the Whitmore house. Graham's buyer people will be there." Smile. Sign. "We clean this up in private." "Why would I attend your donor dinner?" His voice dropped. "Because if you miss this, you lose everything." I looked at him for a long second. He mistook my stillness for fear. It was calculation. "All right," I said. "I'll be there." He smiled with visible relief, as if charm had finally found purchase. Then he reached for June, who turned her face away and asked for blueberries. He laughed awkwardly and said, "Kids, right?" as though fatherhood were an improv prompt. The Whitmore house sat on a square lined with live oaks and old money, the kind of restored mansion Savannah does so well it can make unethical people feel legitimate under chandeliers. Friday night there was rain threatening, but not yet falling, heat trapped in the brick sidewalks, and a crowd composed of investors, local donors, boutique developers, and the social species of men who turn debt into visionary language after 2 bourbons. I wore black. Simple dress, low heels, hair up. Eleanor Vance fastened my bracelet in my kitchen and said, "Do not confuse politeness with surrender." Nathan Bell would meet me there later. The girls were with a licensed overnight nurse approved through the Trust's emergency childcare allocation, because by then I no longer apologized for paying for competent help. When I arrived, Ethan was already in motion across the room, handshakes, shoulder claps, posture arranged around renewed authority. Graham Pike stood near the bar in a tan suit that cost too much and fit too tightly. He saw me and gave the kind of smile men use when they think paperwork is about to become money. "Nora," he said warmly, as if we were old allies. "You look well. I sleep better when my property isn't being marketed without consent." His smile twitched but survived. Always funny. I'm not joking. Before he could answer, Ethan appeared beside us and slid one hand lightly to the small of my back. The gesture would have looked affectionate to anyone watching. To me, it felt like branding. "Glad you came," he murmured. "Am I?" He steered me toward a side parlor set for a private conversation. Two men in dark suits stood near the fireplace. Buyer representatives, I assumed. One woman with a tablet. A folder on a side table. Ethan lowered his voice. "We can do this here quietly." I looked around the room. Quietly. That was always the better option. Then the first turn happened. The woman with the tablet introduced herself not as buyer counsel, but as internal compliance from Coastal Heritage Title. One of the dark-suited men was from First Atlantic Bank's Fraud Investigations Unit. The other was not a buyer representative either. He was a process server waiting on instruction. Ethan's expression changed by degrees, confusion first, then irritation, then something tighter. Nathan Bell stepped into the doorway behind me with another lawyer I did not know and a woman carrying a banker's file box. Ethan said, "What is this?" Nathan answered in the tone he used for explaining storms to people who believed in personal exceptions. "This is the part where administrative fiction ends." Graham took one step backward. The woman from Title opened her tablet and said, "Mr. Callahan, Mr. Pike, we've completed review of the attempted transfer chain associated with the Broughton Street property. Based on metadata, hospital record contradiction, witness evidence, misrepresented beneficial authority, and investor communications, the matter has been referred for civil fraud action and criminal review." Ethan laughed once, sharp and false. At my event. Nathan said, "Your event was convenient." I watched Ethan's face because there is a point when arrogance realizes it has misread the room and the transition is almost physical. He turned to me. "You set this up?" "Yes." "For what?" "Humiliation." "No," I said. "For service." The process server moved then, placing papers first in Ethan's hand, then in Graham's. Temporary restraining expansion. Notice of civil complaint. Demand preservation order. Asset freeze motion tied to investor solicitation based on disputed property authority. Fee recovery under the trust's fraud interference clause. I knew what was in the stack because Nathan had walked me through every page. Still, seeing the papers in Ethan's hands felt unreal in a quiet, almost cooling way. Guests in the main room had begun to notice the shift. Not a shouting scene. Something worse for men like Ethan. Silence collecting around them. Eyes turning. Conversations thinning. Graham scanned the first page and said, "Too low and too fast, you told me she'd sign." Ethan hissed back, "She was supposed to." The compliance woman said, "Sir, we also have investor-side representations describing the property as effectively controlled once domestic noise settles. We advise you both to retain separate counsel immediately." That line landed like a dropped tray. Ethan turned white around the mouth. "That's private correspondence." "Not anymore," Nathan said. Then one of the bank investigators opened the file box and removed enlarged printouts of the digital certificate trail, the IP records, and the nursery camera stills. Not displayed to the whole ballroom on a giant screen. This was real life, not television. But visible enough in that parlor, visible enough when people at the doorway leaned in and saw Ethan carrying my laptop into the dining room on a night I was under hospital observation. Visible enough when they saw Graham Pike entering my back door. Visible enough when timing and signatures and hospital charting aligned. The dramatic irony of that moment was almost elegant. Ethan had invited people there to witness his legitimacy. What they witnessed instead was chain of fraud. He looked at me then with actual panic for the first time in our marriage. "Nora, please. Don't do this here." I kept my voice level. "I'm not doing this. Your documents did." Rain began outside at last, soft against old window glass. Graham was already pulling out his phone, likely for counsel, maybe for excuses. Ethan's donor smile was gone. His shoulders seemed to lose shape inside his jacket. One of the men from the main ballroom, someone I recognized from a local board dinner years earlier, said quietly from the doorway, "Jesus Christ, Ethan." No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Consequence has its own acoustics. Ethan took one step toward me. Nathan moved slightly, not theatrical, merely present. Ethan stopped. We could have handled this privately. I thought of the NICU. The utility shut off notice. The forged signature timed to my hospital stay. You lost private when you used my mother's dead estate plan as collateral for your ego. The room held still. Then Ethan did the thing men like him do when charm, indignation, and intimacy all fail. He tried minimization. This is a misunderstanding. The woman from Title said, "No, sir. A misunderstanding is a typo. This is coordinated, unauthorized action." I almost admired her for that. We left before the scene could become gossip-heavy. There is a difference between justice and spectacle, and I had no interest in staying for the second one. Nathan guided me through the side corridor while the rain thickened outside and the old house smelled faintly of damp wood and flowers. My knees felt weak with delayed adrenaline. On the front steps I stopped and took one full breath. The square glistened under streetlights. Nathan asked, "You all right?" I thought about the answer. "Yes," I said, and for once it was not performative. "I think I am." The official consequences came fast after that because the paper trail had matured. Ethan's counsel tried every familiar shape. Marital misunderstanding, poor communication, mental stress under new fatherhood, misinterpreted authority. None of it survived metadata, hospital records, camera logs, investor emails, and title compliance review. Graham Pike settled parts of the civil side early and tried to distance himself by implying Ethan overpromised access. Ethan tried to suggest I had known more than I did. That died under preserved texts and timeline evidence. The courtroom went silent on the morning the judge reviewed the restraining expansion, property interference claims, and the preliminary findings around forged trust consents. It was not a glamorous courtroom. Fluorescent lights, pale walls, too cold air conditioning, a clerk typing with machine-like indifference. But to me it felt holier than some churches, because facts mattered there more than charm if you assembled them properly. I sat beside Nathan while Ethan sat at the other table looking diminished in a charcoal suit he probably once considered authoritative. He had not shaved closely enough. His watch was gone. Whether sold, hidden, or simply deemed bad optics, I do not know. Graham was absent physically but represented. The bank and title affidavits were already in record. The forensic report on signature pattern irregularities had been filed. The trust's independent trustee appeared by affidavit as well. Ethan's attorney made one last attempt to reframe. "Your Honor, this remains at core a domestic conflict that has been over-legalized by outside parties." The judge, a woman with silver hair twisted low and eyes like winter windows, looked down at the file and then back up. Outside parties did not sign this beneficiary consent while Ms. Callahan was under hospital observation. Counsel swallowed. "We dispute intent." The judge tapped the page. "Intent is not improved by using a spouse's postpartum medical absence to fabricate authority." No one moved. Nathan stood and walked the court through the logic exactly as he had walked me through it months earlier. Trust structure, protected asset status, hospital timeline, digital certificate origin, home network attribution, camera corroboration, investor representation, attempted monetization. He explained the fraud carve-out my mother had built into the trust. He explained why fee shifting applied. He explained why access restrictions and protective supervision over trust distributions remained necessary. Then Ethan spoke. Against his attorney's visible preference, he stood and said, "I was trying to solve problems. We had death. We had 2 babies. She was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. I made bad calls. But I never meant for this to become criminal." I watched him while he talked, and what struck me most was not that he was lying. It was that he still thought intention should outrank impact because his own intention always had. The judge asked, "Did you or did you not represent to third parties that you had near-term control over trust property held for your wife and children?" He hesitated. I may have used imprecise language. "Did you authorize or participate in the preparation of documents bearing her signature while she was hospitalized?" His throat moved. "I didn't think. That is not what I asked." Silence. Finally he said, "Yes." That tiny word changed the air in the room. Not because it surprised anyone. Because admission narrows the road ahead until only consequence remains. The judge granted expanded injunctive relief, upheld the freeze around any attempted transaction, referred the fraud package for prosecutorial review, and approved fee recovery proceedings under the trust terms. On the family side, his visitation remained supervised pending completion of parenting intervention and financial disclosure review. There would be no immediate jail drama, no television version of justice, just the slower, cleaner consequences that alter a man's world in all the places he once thought were private. Credit, reputation, business viability, custodial access, civil liability, recorded orders that outlive mood. Ethan sat down hard. His attorney leaned toward him and said something I did not hear. Ethan kept staring at the bench, then at me, then at the papers in front of him as though enough looking might reorder them. As we were leaving, he said my name. Not loudly, just enough to make me turn. His face was gray with something that may have been fear and may have been self-recognition. Nora, he said, please. I came back. The sentence hung there between us. Yes, I thought. You did. But not for us. Aloud I said, you came back for leverage. Then I walked out. Divorce is less dramatic than betrayal and more tedious than people admit. It took another year to resolve the financial errors cleanly. Ethan consented to a settlement after enough discovery pain made resistance expensive. His role in the attempted property interference cost him dearly in fees and in the informal economy of reputation. The prosecution side did not produce a cinematic perp walk. It produced a deferred arrangement tied to cooperation, admissions, restitution parameters, and compliance. Because white-collar systems prefer documentation to spectacle, and because first-time offenders with counsel and a certain profile often fall into administrative mercy as long as the paper record is ugly enough to control future behavior. I am telling you that because I value realism more than fantasy. Karma, in adult life, often wears khakis and arrives by certified mail. I got the house for a period, then chose to sell it on my timeline and move closer to my office and to better schools. The trust property stayed intact. The florist downstairs expanded. One of the apartments above was renovated and leased. The building became what my mother intended, not an emergency parachute for a husband's vanity, but a steady protected asset anchoring a future he had underestimated. The girls grew. That is the truest revenge against despair I know. They grew. June developed my habit of making lists and my mother's way of looking at people until they became more honest than planned. Willow loved numbers and engines and any toy requiring assembly. The first time they ran across our small backyard in matching rain boots, I stood at the kitchen sink and cried into a dish towel because there are moments when life returns not as grand redemption, but as ordinary proof. Eleanor Vance remained in our lives like a stern, benevolent weather system. She taught the girls card games and how to identify bad silver plating and why every important document should exist in more than one place. Nathan Bell retired 2 years later and sent me a fountain pen as a gift with a note that read, "Your mother would be pleased with your stubbornness." I keep it in my desk. Ethan did eventually complete parenting classes. He learned to arrive on time. He learned not to improvise around paperwork. He learned, I think, that daughters are not props and that courts remember dates better than wives once he hoped would forgive him. He still lives in Savannah as far as I know. His world did collapse, but not in one explosive moral lesson visible from the moon. It collapsed the way structurally unsound things do once load-bearing lies are removed. First the studio, then investors, then access, then credibility, then the easy assumption that he could leave damage behind and return to whatever remained valuable. 1 year later, I sat on the upstairs apartment balcony of my mother's building on a Saturday morning while June and Willa napped inside after a disastrous attempt to help me water herbs. The florist below had set buckets of ranunculus and eucalyptus on the sidewalk. Church bells drifted from somewhere I couldn't see. I had coffee hot enough to steam in the cool air, a stack of reconciled statements on the table beside me, and no one in my life whose love required me to become less precise about reality. That morning, I signed the final approval on a new property management agreement in my own name as beneficiary under trustee supervision. And when I put the pen down, there was no audience, no applause, no dramatic score rising in the background. Just a feeling I had spent years misunderstanding. Peace. Not the peace of everything being fixed forever. The peace of knowing exactly what is mine, exactly what is not, and exactly what I will never again confuse. People hear stories like mine and want the lesson to be about revenge. I understand that. Revenge is a satisfying word. It promises heat. But what saved me was not heat. It was sequence. Hospital records. Camera logs. Trust clauses. Witnesses. Fees. Orders. Boundaries. Childcare invoices paid without apology. Saying no the first time in a voice calm enough to hold. Letting the law do what ego believes only emotion can. If you are in the middle of something like this now, in the thick of abandonment or fraud or the dull sick realization that someone counted on your exhaustion to make you easy to use, hear me carefully. You do not need to become loud to become dangerous. You need paper. You need dates. You need one honest lawyer and one person in your corner who recognizes rot before it spreads. And you need to stop calling your instincts unkind just because they inconvenience someone who benefited from your doubt. The night Ethan left, I thought my life had collapsed in my living room between two crying babies and a half-warmed bottle. The truth is stranger and better. His choices collapsed the fiction. What remained was harder, yes, but it was real. And real things can be built on. June is 13 now. Willa too. They fight over chargers and music and whose turn it is to unload the dishwasher. One wants to argue everything. The other wants spreadsheets for fun. Sometimes they ask what happened between their father and me, and I answer in pieces appropriate to age and honesty. I do not poison them against him. Life already told them enough. Children raised in truth eventually develop their own weatherproofing. As for me, I still keep copies. Of everything. Trust documents in the safe. Orders in labeled binders. Cloud backups with two-factor authentication because Eleanor would haunt me otherwise. But I also keep softer things now. A pressed ranunculus from the first profitable spring at the florist. A photo of the girls asleep nose to nose at 1 year old. My mother's grocery list written on the back of a deposit slip in her quick impatient hand. Evidence matters. So does tenderness. One protects the other. So that is the story of the man who left me with newborn twins to find himself and came back expecting access instead of accountability. He did find something in the end. Not enlightenment. Not reinvention. Not a better version of himself waiting in tropical light. He found that the world he thought would hold still for him had moved into record without him, and record is a colder thing than memory. It does not care how charming you were before the signatures were checked. And if you have ever had to rebuild while someone else called your survival overreaction, tell me what boundary saved you. Tell me the moment you stopped negotiating with the obvious. And subscribe if you want more stories where justice is quiet, earned, and very difficult to reverse.